Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Simply Susan, where we explore historical sewing, cooking, and living. Today we will be cutting out the pattern for our Victorian walking skirt and beginning construction. Please remember to subscribe for more updates. Thank you! Now, the grain line of your fabric runs along with the selvage edge. So if your fabric is folded in half with the selvages together, like it usually is when you buy it off of a bolt, the grain is going to run with the selvage. So when you lay it out, you want the pattern is probably going to have the grain line on it. You want that to be running in the same direction as your selvage edge. And this does matter. There's a lot of different YouTubes that I've watched where they actually like explain how fabric's made and why the weave is the way it is, but fabric can have some stretch depending on which way it's oriented, due to what the weft and weave, well, due to the threads as they're put together. When you're laying out your pattern and you're going to cut it, if you don't want to put holes in your fabric, like I know taffeta can sometimes show holes, or if it's something really thick like this, you can use pattern weights to hold the pattern and the material down together. I do not have pattern weights, but I saw somebody else use cans of cat food, so we're going to do that, because if there is one thing there's not a shortage of in this house, it is cat food and cats. Moving right along, we are going to repeat the same process with our lining fabric and our fashion fabric for the outside of the skirt. I am just lining up the pattern pieces with the grain line, putting on my fabric weights or cat food, and cutting around the pieces. Now you will see me whenever I finish cutting off a piece kind of writing on it. What I'm doing here is marking the pattern markings with a little bit of tailor's chalk, and I also mark what letter the pattern piece is, and I mark what is the right side and wrong side of the pattern, so we know, or of the fabric rather, so we know when we go to put it together. Most fabrics, it's fairly easy to tell what is the right or wrong side, but I usually just do it kind of out of habit. I am going to try to show you how I do a French seam. So you start with your wrong sides together. This is wrong, this is wrong. We put the wrongs together. Now when I do a French seam, so like real sewing people, you sew it at whatever seam allowance, then you trim it down to 1/8 of an inch, and then you flip it and do the rest. Well, I just try to do the smallest seam allowance that I can, and then flip it, and then I don't have to mess around as much. Then I'll take this over to the machine and press it so it goes to one side. We ironed the seam that we sewed over to one side. And what you see me doing here is flipping that seam back so that this time when we sew it, we are sewing it with the right sides together, and that's the wrong side facing up that I'm sewing through. What will happen, and we're going to sew this with about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, is that seam that we sewed and flipped inside the other one will be fully encased by this second seam that we are sewing. This way we don't have any raw edges to contend with, and it saves some time from doing a hand-felled seam. It won't be as flat, so sometimes that can be a limitation depending on what part of a project you're working on. And to be honest, I'm still not 100% sure how doing these seams as French seams is going to work out in the end, but it seemed like the best option for me to get my skirt constructed and still have my seams nicely finished. This French seam was for the center back and stopped a few inches down from the top of the waistband. Next, we have to try to put in the placket. Okay, so I'm going to bring you in for a little bit more of a close-up on what I just did here. This is the placket strip that I inserted, and you can see I did zigzag over the raw edge here. I want to believe that I'm going to be a good sewing person and go ahead and fell this, but for right now, I at least wanted to do something because this is such, you know, a fraying material that I wanted to secure it somehow. So I sewed that on. Did not do perfect getting in the top stitch, but I'm not angry. So a little concern here, it's a little bit bunchy because I chose to do the French seam. I'm not too upset though. I think that once you put in some of the other gathering that's gonna go up through here, I think that that'll probably just sort of fold in and be fine. But I'm gonna give this a little bit more of a press and then continue attaching the other pieces. We are back. I seamed together all of the panels, did a French seam on all of the pieces. It goes together really nice and easily. You just put the back center two pieces labeled D together, and then you just work your way around until you put the center front pattern piece A on, and it worked out pretty nicely. Right now I still do not have a waistband, I still don't have the hem facing, and I have this held on with a safety pin, but I just wanted to see how it was going to feel or look, and I think I'm actually really happy with how it's coming together so far. It's got a nice shape to it, a nice fullness in the bottom, but it doesn't feel overwhelming. Like, it feels like I could wear this and not feel too out of place or too, yeah, it feels nice. And I think that the shape is going to be good. I pressed the seams so they're all going outwards. And there's a little bit of room here in the waist that will be able to gather just a tiny bit in the back. But overall, I'm pretty pleased with how this is coming together so far. So thank you for sticking in there, and thank you for watching part 2. In there, and thank you for joining me as we start the construction of our Truly Victorian 1898 walking skirt. Thank you for joining me, and please remember, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel to be notified of the updates as we continue on this project. Please please leave me a comment, let me know if you're enjoying what we're doing and anything that you would like to see in the future.